very informally in our easy way here, just to kind of bring ourselves all together, bring ourselves into the present moment. Why don't you just take notice of some breaths you are receiving? Even close your eyes for a moment and just in your own rhythm, breathing in and out, taking a moment, like I said, to just become a little bit more present, perhaps. And you might want to take a second or two to set an intention for yourself for these 90 minutes that we'll be spending together this evening. Care to? Continuing to breathe, to notice your breathing. All right. So, this evening we're going to talk just a little bit in this warm up about intention setting, but more specifically, this whole question about letting go of how and letting go of when we deign to set shiny, clear intentions for the things that we want to be and do and have. And you guys know we have an intention setting clinic every single Wednesday. What do you want Wednesday? Because while it's pretty simple conceptually how to set an intention, there are a lot of mechanics to it, and the nature of it is multidimensional, and so it has some complexity to it. And one of the things that you and I both know is that we often get very caught up in this idea once we've got our intention shiny and clear. We get very caught up in letting go of how it's going to happen and letting go of when it's going to happen. Now, if you have complaints about that part of the process, I feel you, and I direct those complaints somewhere else. I didn't make up the rules. And yet I know, and you know, that in all seriousness, if that's the right way to put it, letting go of how, letting go of when is not so easy. The main fun well, there's so many advantages to it once you move into it. This is a paradigm shift. Every single one of us, one way or another, was taught somewhere along the way to set a goal, set an objective, and then make it happen. And we've got very good at that. And that's actually a 3D way of doing things. And you and I are now engaged in this process of not so much letting go of 3D, although we are letting go of a lot of it, but we're also going to live on a planet that exists in 3D. And yet we're going to shift our consciousness to become 5D consciousness in these 3D bodies and on this 3D planet. And that's not new for any of us. And so shifting our paradigm from letting go of how is huge for any of us. Letting go of when. I mean, that's a classic thing. Put it on the calendar, set a time, right? That's a tool of 3D. It's a fantastic tool. I love knowing that every Monday at 8 p.m. in New York, 5 p.m. in California, and whatever time it is anywhere else on Mondays, we're going to be doing this, right? It's very helpful. And yeah, Gina's talking about 4D, which I'm sort of skipping over for this conversation. But you get what I'm talking about. Letting go of how is a huge paradigm shift. Letting go of when is a huge paradigm shift. I get that. That's why we effort to shift our consciousness, to shift our paradigm. And a little bit of a story came to me recently about this. I think it's kind of about this. It's connected to it. So relax for a moment or two of story time around this whole question of how and when. So back up about 15 years, many of you know I had a love of my life partner, young guy, winds up in the hospital, seemingly healthy. Boom, sorry, you got stage 4 cancer. 80% of his colon comes out in emergency surgery, and then it's here's your death sentence and figure out what you want to do. And so we entered into that process. Now, I was totally immersed in and a fan of alternative medicine, and he was totally immersed in and a fan of, let's just call it traditional Western medicine, and more intrigued by this stuff. And now here it all is, and he's got some decisions to make. And going around, ultimately he decided for an alternative path and was proceeding along it very well. Well, even before we got there. So this is the main part, and I almost skipped over it. So there were so many people uh, who knew and loved him and were very concerned. And so we set an intention way in the beginning of this to share the process with dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people, probably 200 to 300 all combined, all his people, his people where he was from, his people where he had moved to, and then my people where I was living, right? And so the intention was to offer what he hoped would be education for anybody should they find themselves in this situation someday, particularly because he was going to go about it in this alternative way, which was very different for virtually everybody he knew. And that's what we did. So he would go and keep in touch and share the process with people. And we really were excited about the fact that now all these different people were getting different thoughts and ideas about but different thoughts of ideas about how a person is handling this particular situation, with the hope that it would be of use and value to some people. And this wasn't hard. It was not hard in that situation to let go of how that was going to happen. We don't know. We're just going to give some information as and when it's happening. Give the information. That's it, right? Don't know how it's going to land anywhere. Certainly don't know when. And in that regard, as you guys know, sometimes it's easy to set an intention to let go of the how and when you don't care so much, or it's not even that you don't care, but it's just not that urgent, right? So, blah, blah, blah. There he proceeds through. He's doing really well with the alternative, but he had a complication from the initial surgery. And all the other alternative things weren't quite fixing it. It needed to be fixed. And the Western people were just like, let us just go in. It's going to be a quick little minor procedure to fix that thing, and then you can go back to doing what you're doing. And that was the choice that he made. And it was interesting because then people on the alternative side, who were also very much wondering, keeping an eye on things, then it's like, oh, now you're doing Western? Really? Thoughts and ideas about that. Well, what does that mean? And whatever. But he was doing his thing, continued to talk about it. Fast forward to a few days ago, 15 years later, he died at the end of 2005. And I have a very, very good friend who lives in New Zealand, American. About the moment that my partner was diagnosed and started his healing journey through the whole thing is when these guys moved to New Zealand, he and his girlfriend. They absolutely decided to stay there. It was very much around, not so sure I want to be an American anymore, and that whole thing. Had a couple of kids, got married, they were living a life there, and they're doing their thing. He just celebrated his 50th birthday. He is like the most fit person you've ever seen. One of those guys. He's just super lean, super fit, super limber, always doing, was a gymnast, is a yogi, does all kinds of bicycle marathon trips and everything. He's just that guy. Well, he landed in the hospital a few days ago or last week with the best kind of heart attack you can have, whatever that means, but he told me what it meant. And he went on to tell me when we got to talk, and I was apparently one of the first people that he really was talking to, because he got to the hospital, wife stayed home with the kids, It's nighttime. There he is. They're describing to him what he had, the best kind of heart attack you can have. And this is what we need to do. And what we need to do was very much a Western approach that he was not at all interested in. At least that was his initial reaction. And when I was telling you earlier about when Steve went to have that second procedure and the alternative people were like, what are you doing? What we said was, you know what, this choice wasn't all that difficult because it was a purely mechanical thing. Yes, he would have some anesthesia. They'd do the thing, fix that mechanical thing, and then he'd be back on. So the way that he framed it actually carried forth 15 years later to my friend now in the hospital in New Zealand, lying there. Nobody's around. His wife is at home dealing. He doesn't know quite what to do. And he remembers what we talked about 15 years ago, that as alternative medicine people and going about this in an alternative way, there was this one Western mechanical thing. And he was able to frame it in that way and totally quoted us, him and Steve, in a way that I didn't even remember, and said that for him lying there in the hospital, should I do this? Shouldn't I? Shouldn't I? That it was that message that came to him that gave him the confidence to choose to do what they were recommending. And our intention to be of educational use and value to anybody at any point, at least was realized with one human. How it happened, my partner Steve did what he did. The when, 15 years later, right? Not up to us. So is that absolutely a how and when story? Kind of, sort of, maybe. But it also speaks to the idea, and I've shared this with you before, in my own personal experience, I have found that when we let go of how and when we let go of when, that the universe tends to use the people who are closest to us, who can often serve as those serendipities, who are just available. They're vibing in the right place, they've got physical proximity, and they are what helps an intention transmute and transform into form in our lives. And we human beings are often vessels for such serendipities. So it's also, I think, an illustration of that idea as well. So nice deep breath with me if you would, just to hold on to any juicy bits of that and let go of anything that you don't need. Let's come back and talk about what you want to talk about, because it's a Monday drop-in.